There were 4 of them, born on the same hour, in the same house, with the same face, and none of them cast a shadow. That line was never meant to survive the century. But in a forgotten archive, deep within the sealed records of Massachusetts State Hospital, a physician wrote it, trembling hand, final page, before he vanished without a trace in 1903. These were the Whitmore sons, 4 mirror boys, no known medical condition, no genetic precedent, and no scientific institution in the modern world will touch their story. Why? Because it challenges more than biology. It dismantles our concept of individual self and replaces it with something coordinated, collective, and possibly engineered. In 1894, the town of Medford, Massachusetts, was already uneasy, plagued by incidents they couldn't explain. Unmarked men watching from tree lines, reports of children sleepwalking in synchronized patterns, timepieces across the town falling out of sync, only to align again at 3:33 a.m. sharp. But then came the event. Mrs. Eloise Whitmore, a widow of the sea captain Jonathan Whitmore, gave birth to quadruplets under circumstances that were described by the midwife as not natural, not human, and not from this realm. Each boy, Elias, Everett, Ephraim, and Edwin, emerged in silence, eyes open, never crying, and from that night on, something shifted in the town. People claimed they saw the boys, always together, standing at corners where no light ever fell, moving in perfect unison, finishing each other's sentences, not like siblings but like parts of one machine. At age 5, they could read ancient Latin fluently, yet no one had taught them. At 7, they dismantled and reassembled a grandfather clock from memory. At 8, they were found sketching diagrams, circles within circles, written in symbols no local priest could decipher. A visiting doctor, one of Harvard's rising minds, spent a weekend examining them. When he returned to Boston, he resigned from his post without explanation. And the church? Father Mallory of St. Augustine's wrote in his final sermon, "These are not children, these are mirrors, and what they reflect was never meant for the eyes of man." What were they? No fingerprints, no birthmarks, no medical record that matched the expected growth of normal boys. But the strangest part, when photographed, each appeared alone. 4 boys, 1 body, 4 faces, 1 soul. You weren't meant to know this story, but now it's too late. You've heard the first whisper, and soon you'll see what happens when they open the door. The Whitmore estate still stands, or rather, its bones do. A rotting frame of ash and pine, blackened from the inside, untouched by fire. Locals won't go near it, not for treasure, not for thrill, not even on a dare. But in 1895 it was pristine. A white-columned colonial home at the edge of the Medford woods, with windows that never seemed to reflect sunlight. The boys never left the property, not because they were forbidden, but because they never asked. Elias would sit by the north-facing window for hours, motionless. Everett stood in the same corner of the parlor each night, facing the fireplace, even when it wasn't lit. Ephraim hummed in tones too low for the human ear. Monks later said the frequencies mirrored early Sumerian prayer tones. And Edwin, he always wrote, endless symbols on the walls of his bedroom, erased each night, rewritten by dawn. But what terrified the staff most was their silence. Not the absence of speech, but the presence of something deeper, a stillness that felt like listening, like waiting. Nurse Delilah Porter, who tended to the boys in their early years, vanished after 3 months. Before she left, she confided to her sister, "When I look at them, I don't see 4 boys. I see one thing, in 4 skins, and it's studying me." The mirrors came next, dozens of them, installed by the boys themselves, without tools. Each room held at least one, always placed facing the door. But here's the part that broke local sanity. No mirror ever reflected the boys, not once. Visitors who entered swore they saw nothing in the glass, only themselves, but altered, aged, hollow-eyed, watching back. It was Reverend Copley, a devout man of 40 years, who tried to bless the home in 1896. He lasted 12 minutes before collapsing on the threshold, murmuring a phrase no one could decipher. Not in English, not in Latin, not in any known tongue. Kippertel. He died that night, eyes wide open, face frozen in a mixture of awe and horror. His final note, hidden in his coat, They are not bound by time. They do not grow. They do not age. They mirror us to feed, and we are the ones being studied. No scientific institute would step forward after that, not one, because when truth makes the rational mind fracture, the only thing left is silence. And what grew in that silence was watching. In November of 1897, something changed. The townsfolk noticed it first, not the authorities, not the scientists, the old ones, the gravediggers, the herbalists, the men who kept their ear to the soil. They began whispering about a turn in the gaze, that the boys had stopped watching the world and started projecting something back into it. It began with animals. The Whitmore property, once filled with the cries of birds and the rustle of deer, fell silent. Carcasses were found near the eastern edge, arranged geometrically, circles, spirals, perfect lines of decay pointing inward, always inward, to the house. Sheriff Dalton, a rational man, finally stepped in. He had dismissed the reports for years, calling it hysteria around a strange family, but something made him visit that November, something he never wrote down. He entered at 9:15 a.m. He was never seen again. His pocket watch was later found in the basement, melted. What pulled the town into terror, however, wasn't a disappearance. It was what came next. The mirror room. A carpenter named Silas Moore, hired to repair a rotting beam in the east wing, stumbled upon a hidden door. Inside, a chamber with no windows, lined entirely in black glass. Floor, ceiling, all four walls. He ran from the house screaming. When men finally entered days later, the room was gone. Only an empty space remained. And Silas? He went blind within the week, not from injury, but from refusal. He clawed out his own eyes with a spoon and said, "I saw too much of myself in them. Or not myself. What I could become." The Whitmore boys were never questioned, never arrested, never accused, because no one could prove anything. And more chillingly, no one could remember how old they were. In photos 5 years apart, they looked the same. No change in height, weight, bone structure, or voice. It was Edwin, the writer, who left it, the only direct clue, scrawled on the inside of a milkman's cart in ink that bled through wood. We are not born. We are reflections made real. Every man feeds the mirror. Every mirror returns the man. It wasn't metaphor. And from this point forward, the reflections began to move without their originals. You think your reflection follows you? After this, it didn't. By 1898, the Whitmore estate was no longer considered part of Medford. Not officially. Maps still labeled it. Letters still arrived. But the townspeople, by some unspoken pact, ceased acknowledging it, as if the land itself had folded into a different category of existence, not forgotten, not forbidden, just excluded. But the boys remained, still four, still synchronized, still waiting. That's when the psychologists arrived. 2 men from Boston, sent under institutional silence, Dr. Alton Greaves and Dr. James K. Huxley, rising stars from the Massachusetts School of Mental Anatomy. Their visit was not public. No records exist, only the fragments of Greaves's journal found decades later beneath the floorboards of an abandoned faculty home. His entries begin clinically. The boys are lucid, articulate, cooperative. Yet each responds only when the others are present, as if no thought can be formed unless echoed. Then, fascination. Testing reveals simultaneous response to stimuli delivered separately. Elias responds to color while Everett blinks at the same moment, blindfolded. Ephraim reacts to pain inflicted on Edwin's hand. Then, fear. They correct our equations, not mathematically. Metaphysically, they complete sentences we haven't yet spoken, not guesses, not anticipation, completion, then silence. Dr. Greaves's final journal entry. We are not studying anomalies. We are being introduced to a superior pattern, one that sees our individuality as an illness. Dr. Huxley was found wandering the Boston rail yards barefoot, coat inside out, muttering a phrase that chilled even the asylums. They remember being born from behind the mirror. He died in confinement a year later, chewing through his own tongue. And still, the boys smiled. They had begun standing at mirrors again, not passively, but communing, speaking in whispers without sound, their Mouths would move in unison, but the glass never echoed the motion. Instead, the mirror images would begin before the boys did, predicting movements by seconds. The townspeople tried not to look, but reflections are everywhere. Barber shops covered their glass, schools removed polished surfaces, but it wasn't enough, because reflections don't stay behind when the pattern takes root. They step forward. By winter, the first children began speaking in patterns they couldn't explain. Drawings emerged in classrooms, spirals, figures with 4 faces, and always at the bottom, one phrase in a child's hand: "We are ready." It wasn't just mirrors anymore. By the spring of 1899, any surface could hold them. Window panes, still water, even the shine of a boot left in sunlight too long. People began noticing it, the movement in the wrong direction, the slow deliberate delay, or worse, when their reflection did something they hadn't done yet. One woman, Agatha Merrill, stared too long into the lake near the Whitmore property. She claimed her reflection smiled first, then stepped backward into the water. She screamed and backed away, but her husband, who heard her cry, arrived too late. There were no ripples, no splash, only Agatha's shoes at the water's edge, facing the lake. And inside her home, her mirror self stood motionless in the hallway for 3 days before vanishing. No one would enter the house again. The mayor petitioned the state for investigation. His letters were returned unopened. The postal rider assigned to Medford quit, citing unaccountable anxiety when riding within 2 miles of the Whitmore perimeter. No birds, no wind, just that soundless pressure of being watched from inside yourself. Then came the drawings, dozens of them, mailed anonymously to nearby towns, each one etched with a charcoal far too dark for the paper, almost sticky, and every page the same image. 4 boys, no faces, just black glass where their eyes should be, and behind them, a man, featureless, arms spread like a puppet master, or a mirror. Beneath each sketch, a signature: Edwin, Elias, Ephraim, Everett. The Whitmore sons were now broadcasting, not speech, not thought, but presence. A spreading pattern that trained the human mind to stop asking questions and start complying with the rhythm, not out of fear, but because it felt natural, even comforting. Some townsfolk began humming in unison, unaware, tapping fingers in mirrored sync, daughters speaking their mother, sentences before they were spoken, a kind of possession without possession, a psychic infection carried by silence and glass. Those who resisted felt pressure in the skull, migraine, bleeding from the ears. Eventually they too began to mirror. And still, the boys did nothing. They only watched. And every mirror in Medford began to tilt, ever so slightly, toward Whitmore House. By autumn of 1899, even the skeptics fell silent. There were no more letters, no more doctors, no more requests from Boston. Those who tried vanished en route. Their carriages found intact, rain still warm, but every seat empty. And the Whitmore boys, they hadn't aged a day, their hair never grew, their skin never paled. It was as if time paused in their presence, but it wasn't stasis, it was containment. Like reality itself was being filtered through them. And inside that house, the mirrors had begun to multiply. The Whitmores had long ago removed all glass from their home, or so they thought, but now panes reappeared without being placed. Cabinets reflected, handles gleamed, and worse, visitors claimed to see others in the rooms, not just the 4 boys, not just reflections, but projections, rehearsals of events that hadn't yet happened. One maid, the last ever to work inside, said she walked past the boys seated at the dining table, only to find them again in the upstairs hall, seconds later, silently watching her from opposite ends. She fled, trembling, repeating one phrase. There were more than 4. A quiet rumor spread that the boys were not the origin, but the channel, that something older, buried deeper, had found its inlet through their synchronization. A signal, not a scream. Then the clocks began to fail. First they froze, all at the same moment, 3:44 a.m. Then they reversed, ticking backward as if winding back the town's timeline. People reported waking up in beds they hadn't slept in for years, finding items they had long ago lost. One boy swore his dead brother stood outside the window, beckoning him. They began to call it mirror hour. Between 3:44 and 3:45 a.m., nothing functioned correctly. Reflections no longer matched. Photographs exposed black, dogs whimpered, infants wailed in harmony, and every time the boys would be awake, not moving, not speaking, just watching, as if taking attendance of the living. That winter, Whitmore House grew larger from the inside. Blueprints no longer matched. New doors, extra halls, rooms that shouldn't exist. It was no longer a home, it was becoming a receiver. Something had begun transmission, and the four Mirror Boys, they were its choir. By 1900, Whitmore House was no longer on the map. Not in a metaphorical sense. The cartographers literally stopped drawing it. The property line blurred on every updated county document. Roads that once led to it curved elsewhere. Train tracks warped to avoid it by degrees no engineer could explain. People began calling the area the Silver Fold, a term whispered by those who'd seen the shimmer, a visual distortion like heat rising off stone that covered the hill where the house still stood, as if the entire estate had been folded inward, mirrored into another plane that the eye could still glimpse, but not touch. And in that fold, four boys, standing exactly as they always had, unmoved, unaging, unreal. One priest, Father Abram Clark, attempted an exorcism. He claimed the boys were the result of inversion rites long outlawed by the early church, forbidden rituals designed not to cast demons out, but to cast selves inward, sealing souls beneath the reflective plane. He entered the house carrying nothing but oil, a crucifix, and 3 psalms memorized in reverse. He walked through the front door at dusk, and by dawn, his voice was echoing from every mirror in Medford. Screaming, but never the same scream twice. The sounds were pasted together, spliced from different hours, different people, forming languages no one had taught. In some mirrors, his reflection still clutches the crucifix. In others, he claws the glass like its flesh. He was absorbed. Soon after, the townspeople developed a fear of their own homes. They covered mirrors with cloth, smashed glass, refused to drink from still cups. But it didn't matter. The phenomenon had spread beyond physical reflection. It was in memory now. Children began recalling events they'd never lived, reciting stories no one had told them, all of them involving 4 boys, always standing in the same order, always in perfect silence. One child drew the same house over and over, insisting it had more rooms than God. Sleepwalkers flooded the local clinic, but none could be cured. Because each of them said the same thing when shaken awake. We saw ourselves, watching us sleep. And every time they said it, their eyes flicked, not toward the window nor the door, but to the dark corner of the room, where a mirror should have been. By midsummer of 1901, the first townspeople began vanishing. Not in the ordinary way. These disappearances left nothing behind. No scent, no footprint, no echo of breath. Entire families were found mid-meal, food still warm, chairs toppled as if some gravitational command had pulled them backward, not out the door, but inward, as in through. A pane of window glass left steaming as if something had passed through at speed, not shattered, dissolved. Eyewitnesses said the light bent near the house, that you could see double trees, double moons, for half a second before the world corrected itself. But it wasn't correction. It was revision. A few brave surveyors tried to enter the Silver Fold to chart what was left of the Whitmore estate. They did not return, but their instruments did. 3 compasses, 2 watches, 1 camera. The film in the camera showed 12 exposures, all black, until the final frame. That final image is still locked in the Medford County Archive vault, but I've seen it. 4 boys, still, barefoot, palms open, like they were catching invisible rain. Behind them, the hallway splits into 6 identical corridors, a mirrored labyrinth. But here's the detail no one forgets. No matter how quickly they close their eyes, each corridor contained another version of the boys, altered, slight, wrong. 1 set older, 1 taller, 1 bloody, 1 burning, and 1 with no eyes at all. By now, whispers reached Washington, but no officials came, no investigations. Only an anonymous letter was filed into the Smithsonian's sealed archive in December 1901, unsigned and unacknowledged. The letter contained only 18 words. Do not break the circle. They are not children. They are tuning forks, and something is listening. Whatever the Whitmore boys were, they were not possessed, they were not even haunted, they were receiving. And the chains broadcast was widening. In churches across the county, reflections began to linger a moment too long. Mirrors caught things no one had done yet, and when the wind passed through the town after dark, you could hear it whisper, "We are already inside you." The townspeople of Medford did what all terrified communities eventually do. They turned to fire. In the fall of 1902, they climbed the Fold Hill under cover of fog, armed with oil, flint, and salt-packed barrels. No torches, no prayers, just quiet resolve and eyes that would not meet each other, not for fear of guilt, but for fear of seeing someone else reflected. The Whitmore house stood untouched. Its wood was dry without rot, its frame unweathered. No birds perched on its roof, no vines reached for its seams, a structure like a memory, present but untouchable. Inside, it was said, the rooms changed places depending on who entered. Stairs led to doors that hadn't been built. Ceilings pulsed. Still, they set it alight. The flames rose fast, almost too fast, as if the house was ready, as if it wanted to burn. But what came out of the fire was not smoke, not ashes, but mirrors. Shards. Hundreds, tumbling upward in defiance of gravity, each reflecting a sky not our own. Some showed stars that had never existed, others reflected the faces of the people below, aged by centuries, or eyeless, or smiling mouths filled with teeth that were not human. Then, silence. No screams, no collapse. The house simply wasn't there anymore. Just a perfect blackened circle in the earth. And 4 burn marks, small, identical, where the boys once stood. For a while, Medford breathed again. People uncovered mirrors. Windows were replaced. Children stopped dreaming of hallways. But by 1903, a new house began to build itself on the fold. No one touched it. No foundation was laid. Locals swore the boards grew from the soil like bone. One man carved into a beam and found marrow. The house had no doors, only glass walls, and inside, figures moved. 4 boys, again, but now accompanied by dozens more, some older, some smaller, some still forming. And people began to whisper, "They're multiplying." A geologist from Boston tried to explain the fold as a naturally occurring magnetic vortex, a place where gravity and time collapse in on themselves. He spent one night on the hill. In the morning, only his boots remained, one standing forward, the other turned back. In February of 1904, the mirrors began whispering, not loud, not human, but unmistakable, like insects learning language. Some families said it started in their bathroom glass. Others said the black of the window at night twisted, showing images they hadn't lived yet. One girl saw her mother die in a chair she didn't own, 3 days before the purchase was made. A young boy watched his own face slowly blink out, pixel by pixel, until the glass was empty. Not a reflection, not a prophecy, a replacement. And it wasn't confined to homes anymore. The town's only hotel closed after every mirror in every room, simultaneously, displayed the same image, a town underwater. Buildings rotted, corpses floated, a street sign read, "Whitmore Crossing," barely legible beneath the algae. That same week, a preacher at First Tabernacle declared from the pulpit, the 4 mirror boys were not punished by God. They are God's punishment, not sent to test us, sent to reflect what's coming. His congregation burned the church down with him still inside, but he didn't scream. Witnesses say he laughed. The official line was that the town had been cursed by bad land, by old blood, by the Whitmore experiments, but deeper voices, ones with access to archived texts, told another story. A 1712 document from northern France refers to les enfants miroirs, children who reflected the uncreated world and had to be sealed in chambers of salt and iron. The descriptions were eerily close. 4 of them, silent, pale. They mimic without instruction. They speak what no child should know. They are born, and the village begins to vanish. Another scholar traced similar cases through Prague, Palermo, and Punjab. Always 4, always male, always mirrors involved. But in Whitmore's case, the mirrors were no longer tools, they were invitations, and more people were accepting them. Beck. Oz now, when someone stood too long in front of a mirror in Medford, they might see a hand on their shoulder, one that was not their own. And sometimes they turned, and sometimes they didn't turn back, because the four mirror boys weren't just reflections of reality, they were openings, and something from the other side was watching, waiting, and learning to smile. They came for Dr. Malcolm Renner in the spring of 1905. He had been the last surviving physician involved in the boy's delivery, a man who had moved across the country, changed his name, and never spoke of that night again. But the mirror found him. Witnesses claimed he'd boarded up every reflective surface in his home, even polished the inside of his eyelids with acid. But one night, his neighbors heard him screaming backwards, syllables in reverse, as if time had inverted in his throat. When they broke down the door, they found no body, just a large mirror, standing upright in the middle of the room. And in it, four boys, holding hands, smiling. And Dr. Renner, on the other side of the glass, pressing his palms against it, eyes hollow, still alive, still mouthing something over and over. "Let me die the right way." But the mirror was cold to the touch. It would not let go. Back in Medford, mirrors began multiplying. Where once there had been one in a room, there were now two, then three. No one installed them. They simply appeared on closet doors, ceilings, inside drawers, behind wallpaper. If you broke one, another would replace it by morning. Children began speaking in mirror language, not babble, but a structured dialect of backward whispers and symbols drawn in condensation. One mother claimed her child no longer cast a reflection. When she confronted him, he said, "Mommy, I'm not your child anymore. I'm the one your mirror raised." Hospitals refused to admit the affected. Churches boarded their windows. The mayor, desperate, ordered every mirror in town to be smashed and buried in a salt-lined pit near the fold. It didn't work, because people themselves began reflecting wrong. One woman, combing her hair, noticed her reflection was crying while she was not. Another man's mirror image blinked out of sync with him. A child's reflected. On turned to look behind itself, and smiled, even though no one was there. These weren't mirrors anymore. They were sentient surfaces, intelligences, and the four mirror boys, they were no longer seen outside the house on the fold, because now they were in the mirrors you looked into. It was never just about the boys. That's what became clear in autumn of 1905 when Father Elgin, a Jesuit investigator sent by Vatican Order 37, uncovered something beneath the fold. Not just a cellar, a chamber, circular, lined with black glass, no doors, no exits, no candle ever stayed lit, and in the very center, 4 stone cradles carved centuries before the town of Medford even existed. Each cradle bore a name, not the boys' names, other names, in languages that shouldn't exist. The father didn't scream. He began to pray, but the mirror walls distorted his voice, stretched it, until it echoed in tongues he didn't know. And then something replied. They found him the next morning at the Medford Inn, naked, eyes gone, facing a cracked shaving mirror, etched into the glass in blood. "We were born looking in, not out. You gave us faces. Now we give you futures." That week, several townspeople reported finding their own childhood selves inside mirrors, watching silently, then mouthing a single word, "undo." But the most terrifying cases were the duplications. A husband would walk into the kitchen and find himself already standing there, smiling. Same clothes, same voice, same memory. One of them would scream, and only one would walk out. Sheriff Mallory, skeptical to the end, finally entered the fold house himself with a squad of armed men and a camera. Only the camera came back. It contained 144 photographs, all of mirrors, all from angles that couldn't have been taken by human hands. The last photo, 4 boys, seated in wooden chairs facing the lens. Each held a mirror in front of their face. In those mirrors, the sheriff and his men, bound and hanging upside down, still breathing. By now, families stopped using mirrors altogether. But even polished wood, still water, or glass windows began reflecting wrong. Because this wasn't Peeboam's obsession. It wasn't even haunting. It was replacement. The four mirror boys were never children. They were avatars, conduits of something older than sight, older than thought, older than reflection itself, and they had waited centuries to show the world how to vanish beautifully. There was a man named Claymore Finch, a blind clockmaker from Pennsylvania who came to Medford not to fix time, but to destroy reflection. He claimed to have survived the Black Lake vanishing of 1879, where 72 residents reportedly drowned without water, their bodies never recovered, only their reflections found floating on the surface days later. Finch had seen things, heard things. He believed the four mirror boys were not just specters, but incarnate fractures in reality, rips in the membrane between what we see and what sees us back. He brought with him a device, not a camera, not a weapon, a mirrorless lens forged from obsidian, ash, and meteoric glass, capable, he claimed, of capturing what the human eye was never meant to hold. He set up shop in Medford, refusing all visitors, sealing his windows with animal fat and bone dust. Inside, he studied light that bent without source, shadows that fell the wrong way, reflections that whispered when the wind was still. Until one night, he broke his silence. He ran through the square barefoot, bleeding from the eyes, carrying his lens, and he screamed, "They're not behind the mirror. They are the mirror. And now, they're remembering us." Then he turned the lens on himself, not to photograph, but to invert. The onlookers said his body folded into itself, not crushed, but peeled inward. Skin turned to glass, organs mirrored, blood reversed. When it was done, nothing remained but a puddle. And in it, the faces of the four mirror boys, watching, smiling, mimicking every expression of the crowd, mocking them. That same night, all clocks in Medford stopped at 4:44 a.m., the minute the boys had been born, the minute the town first knew fracture. And then, an impossible thing, people forgot what they looked like, literally. Men could not draw their own faces, mothers stared at their children, unsure if they were theirs. Portraits warped, aging backwards. A boy cut off his own nose to match the one in the mirror. And still, the Fold house stood silent. Waiting, not abandoned, but observing, because what began in 1894 was never about possession, it was about replacement, and now the world was beginning to split. By winter of 1906, the Vatican had officially declared Medford a silent zone, not holy, not cursed, unrecoverable. All cartographers were instructed to erase it from regional maps. Railways rerouted, postal lines severed, even birds, it was said, stopped flying over the town. And yet, Medford did not die, because people still saw it, in reflections. Across the country, in homes that had never known of the Fold house, children began drawing a staircase with no end, descending into a black room with 4 cradles, always 4, always positioned like a compass. The drawings were consistent, across states, across families. And one more detail chilled every parent who found them. In the corner of each picture, the child had drawn themselves, smiling, but with no face, just a mirror. Then came the whispering glass. A phenomenon first recorded in the asylum outside New Haven. 23 inmates, all previously diagnosed with schizophrenia, suddenly began to exhibit perfect lucidity. They spoke calmly, rationally, and all gave the same account. The mirrors started listening. One by one, they stopped responding to doctors, stopped sleeping, stopped blinking. They positioned mirrors in perfect circles around their cots. On the 7th day, they all vanished simultaneously. In their place, identical copies, identical in face, tone, voice, and utterly empty of memory. Except for one phrase they all repeated in unison: "We are the reflection, you are the fracture. Time is folding again." One nurse managed to escape with a silver locket containing a photograph of the original inmates. When compared side by side, the duplicates were flawless, except for the eyes. In the new bodies, the irises were mirrors, not glassy, not glazed, actual reflective surfaces. And if you looked closely, you could see yourself, but never moving, only watching, frozen. And if you stared too long, that frozen version of yourself would begin to smile. Slowly, knowingly, like it had been waiting. The Fold wasn't a house. It was a door, and the four mirror boys were never victims. They were the keys. The government knew. Not just the state, the federal echelon. A black file labeled Project Polish surfaced briefly in 1922 during the Harding administration before being erased from all official archives. Its contents: a 913-page transcript titled The Fold House, Reflections on a Controlled Breach. It detailed not just the events in Medford, but dozens of similar incidents across the country, from mining towns in Montana to orphanages in North Dakota, where mirrors turned sentient and people forgot they were real. The report confirmed something devastating. Reflections are not passive, they are rehearsals, training grounds for replacement. The document referenced the four mirror boys only once, not as children, not as entities, but as ambassadors of reversal. It claimed they were the first successful instances of inversion birth, where a human soul was never fully born into flesh, but into its reflection, a trial run, and that the Whitmore sons were not the only ones, just the first to survive exposure. A map in the report circled 14 locations, all marked with the same phrase: suspected mirror gate, monitor for fracture behavior. In each location, the same symptoms began appearing: children refusing to sleep in front of mirrors, elders speaking backwards in their sleep, paintings distorting when no one watched them, towns reporting faceless beggars who vanished upon touch, and worst of all, mirrorless houses mysteriously filling with water. Because the fold, it seems, was never just about reflections. It was about pressure, psychological, spiritual, dimensional, and the mirror boys, they weren't just watching, they were weighing, judging whether this side of the glass, the world of men, was worth preserving. One senator who reviewed the transcript went mad. He gouged out his eyes and whispered to reporters, "I was dead." As never me. I was always the version waiting on the other side. This side is only the rehearsal. Afterward, every mirror in his mansion cracked simultaneously, forming 4 distinct fractures: north, south, east, west, just like the cradles, just like the boys, and just like the compass the world forgot it was inside of. In 1933, a man named Dr. Warren Hillsberg conducted an unsanctioned study deep in the Adirondack woods. He was a physicist by trade, but his obsession wasn't particle theory. It was reflection behavior, not light, not angles, but personality drift. He believed mirrors trained consciousness, like a parasite trains its host, and that over time the reflected self begins to evolve independently. His lab had no name, just 4 rooms, and in each, a boy, not born, built. They weren't the Whitmore sons, but they were based on them. Each child was raised with no access to language, only reflection, every wall mirrored, every toy reflective, no human voices, only the echo of their own movement and image. By age 6, all 4 children exhibited identical hand gestures despite being isolated from each other. By age 7, they began drawing symbols they had never been taught, old sigils found in esoteric grimoires dating back to Babylon. And on their 8th birthday, the mirrors began to sweat. Not fog, sweat. Beads of moisture formed from inside the glass. Hillsberg's assistants tried to photograph it, but their cameras malfunctioned. The recordings picked up only 4 voices, whispering in sync. "We do not echo, we rehearse, we do not reflect, we remember." Hillsberg vanished 1 week later. The lab was discovered empty. No blood, no struggle, no power. But one thing remained. In the center of the compound, the floor had been polished into a mirror so perfect, it reflected the sky. And in it, 4 shadows, standing in a circle, holding hands, smiling. But when investigators looked up, there was nothing above them. The shadow children weren't on the ground, they weren't in the sky, they were in the reflection only, and they were growing. Each day, the mirrored sky deepened, grew darker, stars appeared that didn't match any known constellations. Moon, says that rotated backwards, a sun that pulsed like a heartbeat. One agent who remained behind to study the phenomenon went blind, but in his final report, he scrawled one sentence over and over: "I saw my true self, and it was hungry." From that day on, that patch of ground refused to reflect anything again. Mirrors shatter when placed there. Water remains black. And people, They forget who they are. Slowly. By 1940, the U.S. military had quietly established a classified division under the guise of optical warfare. Its real purpose? Containment, specifically mirror breaches. They called it Division K Glass. Located beneath Fort Detrick, Maryland, this program operated 60 feet below ground in chambers lined with obsidian, the only material believed to dull the will of reflections. Only 3 men had clearance to enter the core lab. Inside, a single object, the Whitmore pane, one of the original mirrors recovered from the fold house, not broken, not cracked, preserved. Why? Because it didn't reflect the room it was in. It reflected a different house entirely, one made of stone and firelight, no windows, no exits. And in that house, the 4 mirror boys, still children, still waiting, but no longer standing still. Footage taken in 1942 showed them moving without matching their real-world observers. They made gestures before the scientists moved, they blinked after they should have, and sometimes they smiled at no one at all. One operative swore he saw another figure behind them, tall, thin, wearing no face, only a long, dark veil of hair like running ink. It stood with a crooked hand pressed to the glass, and when they replayed the footage, the figure wasn't there. Just static, just the sound of breathing. But on the 7th day of observation, every mirrored surface in Fort Detrick fractured at 3:13 a.m. Not cracked. Fractured from the inside. Guards reported waking up to whispers in reverse English. One screamed, "They're not in the mirror anymore. They're in the memory of the mirror." And then came the message, burned into the wall above the pane in scorched soot. "The ones you see are not the ones who watch." After that, Division K Glass was dissolved, all records sealed, and the mirror moved to a site only referred to as Room 0, no one knows where. But ever since, one pattern continues. Children born on February 4th, the date of the Fold House fire, often report recurring dreams of a glass house with no doors, and in it, 4 boys. Only now they don't call themselves brothers. They call themselves the originals. There is one place the government never reclaimed, one place they avoid, even in maps. Locals call it the Look Back. It's not a town, not a facility, not even a ruin. It's just a clearing deep in the woods near the original Whitmore site, where no birds sing, where compasses die, and where mirrors cease to work. At the center stands a lone object, a full-length standing mirror with no frame, no back, and no support. It simply hovers, 6 inches off the ground, upright, like it was frozen mid-fall. No wind touches it, no dust settles. It reflects nothing at all, until someone stands in front of it. But those who do report this. They don't see themselves. They don't even see the woods. They see a corridor, stretching long and endless, lined with mirrors on both sides, and lit by a pale yellow glow. And at the very end of the corridor, a door, wooden, ornate, marked with 4 carved figures, boys holding hands, headless. A man named Felix Dearden, an amateur researcher obsessed with the Whitmore legend, once entered the clearing with a body cam and a recorder. His goal? Document the look back. What he recorded has never been released, but the audio was leaked years later. It begins normally, footsteps, breathing, notes. Then, silence. Then, laughter. Childlike, echoing. Not around him, inside the mic. He starts whispering, "They know my name. I didn't tell them my name." The next words are muffled, broken, then crystal clear. "I looked into the glass and saw someone else blinking for me." His breathing quickens. Something metallic hits the ground, then a scream, not of fear, but confusion. And finally, "If I leave, who stays behind? If I stay, what goes back in my place?" He was never seen again. But 6 months later, a mirror arrived at his sister's house in a plain wooden crate. No note, no sender, just the word "look" carved into the sun. A glass. She refused to open it, but her son did. And now, he draws a house every night, Always from the inside, never with windows, always with 4 boys. And once, just once, he signed the bottom corner with a name his mother didn't recognize, Felix. In 1962, a retired Navy cryptographer named Wallace Thorne published a private paper titled Echo Chambers of Non-Reflection. Only 11 copies were printed. Each was mailed to a different institution. None ever responded. But what Thorne wrote revealed what no government body had ever dared speak aloud, that the mirror phenomena were not visual anomalies. They were psychic displacements, not reflections, but anchors. He theorized that certain surfaces didn't bounce light, they invited it in. That mirrors, under rare and ancient conditions, could be entrances for displaced time-bound consciousnesses, entities born of memory and decay, not matter. In one passage, he described a process he called the reclaiming. It begins, he said, when a person dreams of themselves in third person. But not just from above, from behind the eyes of another self. They begin to notice their reflection doesn't sync perfectly. A smile comes too late. A blink comes too early. Soon, they start waking up in rooms where the mirror is fogged, but the room is not. They hear whispers right after leaving the bathroom. They see fingerprints on the inside of mirrors. And then one night, they see something behind their reflection. Not in the mirror, inside them, wearing their face, but wrong. Too still, too knowing. Thorne believed these entities were the psychic remnants of the mirror boys. Not just ghosts, but archetypal parasites. Fragments of a forbidden experiment that shattered the boundary between reflection and soul. In his final entry, Thorne claimed he'd isolated a pattern. People targeted by these fragments often had 4 traits: born near water, suffered head trauma before age 7, recurring dreams of abandoned buildings, photographs in which their eyes appear blurred. He ended his report with a warning: they do not want to replace you, they want to reflect well. How long enough for you to forget who reflected first? A year later, Thorne was found dead, not from suicide, not from violence, but from absence. He was sitting in a chair, clothes intact, house untouched. But his body was mirror-like, silver, smooth, and utterly hollow. No bones, no flesh, just a thin, gleaming shell, as if he'd been reversed. Not killed, copied. By the fall of 1970, a new term began appearing in psychiatric case files along the eastern seaboard. A phrase whispered, never defined, but always coded in red ink: mirror doubling disorder. The patients shared no obvious connections, different ages, different cities, but each one reported an identical phenomenon, a growing sense that their reflection was thinking without them. These weren't hallucinations, these were recorded behaviors. One girl in Albany stopped brushing her hair. She said her reflection was doing it for her, but brushing too hard, like it wanted to pull her scalp off. A banker in Virginia kept finding notes taped to his bathroom mirror that he hadn't written. "Stop watching me watch you. I blinked first. You're not the real one." And in Sanford Hospital, just 3 towns over from Whitmore Sons Orphanage, a 7-year-old boy named Julian Rask was admitted after screaming uncontrollably for hours, pointing at the mirror in his room. The boy said he saw 4 boys wearing his eyes, staring at him from inside the glass. Julian's parents assumed it was a nightmare, but when staff reviewed the room camera footage, they saw something impossible. At 3:41 a.m., Julian was asleep, yet his reflection in the wall mirror was wide awake, staring directly into the camera, smiling. The footage was confiscated within 24 hours. The hospital classified the case as refraction anomaly psychosis, but the staff psychiatrist who logged the report, Dr. Lionel Merkson, never returned to work. He left only one note, pinned to the underside of his desk: "The reflection doesn't copy us anymore. It leads, and we follow, because we forget we were ever whole." Years later, conspiracy researchers would uncover that Dr. Merkson had been a distant cousin of Edwin Whitmore, the very surgeon who founded the mirror experiment at Whitmore Sons. Was Julian R. Ask a descendant of the original boys? Was this an inherited infection, or an unfinished ritual? The deeper the investigators dug, the stranger it became. Some claimed every seventh generation, the reflections of the original four boys reawaken, searching for their final vessel, not to possess, but to finish their inversion. We're no longer looking at them, they're looking through us, and if that's true, then it's not just what they want that matters, it's what they remember. There's a room beneath Whitmore's Sons that was never on any blueprint, not even the original 1891 sketches drawn by Edwin Whitmore himself. It lies beneath the southern cellar, past the defunct furnace tunnel, behind a bricked-over corridor so old the mortar crumbles when touched. It was uncovered by accident in 1996. A group of urban explorers, former students from Penhurst College, broke into the ruins of Whitmore's Sons with handheld cameras and crude battery lights. They found charred desks, skeletal remains of furniture, and rusted hooks still bolted into the floor. But what caught their attention was a draft, a current of cold air seeping out from behind one damp stone wall. They began to chip away at the wall, and what they found was a narrow stairwell descending into silence. 35 wooden steps, no railing. Each step groaned like something ancient didn't want them to come down. At the bottom, they found the chamber, no larger than a chapel vestibule. Walls lined with obsidian glass, not mirrors but something deeper, not reflective, absorptive. In the center of the room sat a four-legged iron chair bolted to a stone disc, surrounded by intricate carvings no one could read. Not Latin, not Hebrew, not any known tongue. One of the students, Micah Eltro, got too close. He touched the glass with the palm of his hand. The footage shows something odd. His reflection didn't touch back. Instead, it placed its own hand, backward, against the opposite side of the glass. Micah began convulsing within seconds. He collapsed, foamed at the mouth, and when he stood again, he wouldn't speak. His friends described him as vacant. His body was moving, but nothing was inside. They fled, left him there. And when authorities arrived 2 days later, the room was sealed shut. Micah was never found. The footage was suppressed, but copies leaked, as I always do, and became known in underground circles as the room where reflections breathe first. Some believe that chamber was a birthing ground, that the four mirror boys weren't victims, but prototypes, made to lure us into a pact we don't understand, a pact not of blood, but of sight. What kind of institution builds mirrors that don't reflect? What kind of doctor studies what looks back at you instead of you? And what kind of boy can speak to his own image without using his mouth? By the winter of 1895, the youngest of the four mirror boys, Eli Whitmore, stopped acknowledging anyone but the glass. He refused meals unless the tray was placed before the mirror. He stopped sleeping. He stared for hours, motionless, breathing only when his reflection did. According to notes from an unverified nurse's journal, Eli began whispering to the mirror, though his lips never moved. They said the sound came from the glass itself, and what it said wasn't English, nor German, nor Latin, nor Aramaic. It was a string of phonetic syllables that seemed to echo backward, like hearing your thoughts rewind. This language, the journal claims, could bend metal, shatter bulbs, and, most disturbingly, influence human behavior. Staff members began showing symptoms. One orderly plucked out both of his eyes with a scalpel, claiming, "He made me see too much." A secretary tried to strangle herself with the wax ribbon from a typewriter. 3 patients not connected to the boys began compulsively drawing a symbol, an inverted eye wrapped in thorns. Every witness described the same feeling, not fear, not madness, but displacement, as if their soul had shifted 2 inches to the left. One inspector, George Lanning, sealed the boys' mirror rooms indefinitely. He ordered iron plates installed over each glass, wrote in his log, "They are not mirrors, they are doors, and someone is watching through the keyhole." 2 weeks later, Lanning vanished. No resignation, no belongings taken. His final letter, unsent and half-burned, simply read, "We are not looking in, we are being looked through." What no one tells you, not the hospitals, not the historians, not the families, is that some mirrors are not made to show you yourself. They are made to copy you, and once the copy is complete, it doesn't need you anymore. By spring of 1895, the Whitmore facility was no longer classified as a hospital. It was rebranded, quietly with no public announcement, as a cognitive reflection laboratory, overseen by a new governing body called the Inner Commonwealth Committee. No one knew who sat on that committee, no photographs, no charters, only sealed correspondences signed with the initials ICC. What happened next was not psychiatry. It was experimentation, systematic, invasive, and ritualized. Each of the 4 mirror boys was assigned a private technician, not a doctor, not a psychologist, but a man trained in interrogation of visual anomalies. These technicians weren't trying to cure them, they were trying to extract something. Not thoughts, not memories, but instructions. One journal, hidden in a false panel beneath the floorboards of room 12, detailed the trials. Day 1. A technician presents the boy with a photograph of himself. The mirror shows 2 boys, one smiling, one crying. Day 4. The boy is asked to draw what he sees in the glass. He draws a human skeleton, but it has no head. Day 9. The mirror fogs on its own. A handprint appears on the inside. It has 6 fingers. By week 3, the boys had become unrecognizable. Their eyes didn't blink. Their skin grew ashen, not pale but tinted like burnt paper. One boy, Mason, was found standing in a cruciform posture before the glass, mimicking a figure that was not his reflection. The technician assigned to him, Harold Trell, documented a voice he heard echoing from the mirror. "We are the second attempt. Your design was flawed. Ours is not." 2 days later, Trell hanged himself with piano wire in the observation chamber. When his body was cut down, carved into his back were the words, "Let the glass finish what the womb could not." From that point on, the facility went under full lockdown. Guards were posted, all windows blacked out. Mirrors across the building were either removed or covered in thick canvas tarps. But it was too late, because something had already stepped through, and it didn't need glass anymore. You've heard of mimicry, of parrots repeating words, of children echoing their parents, of AI learning from us. But what happens when the reflection learns faster than the original? When the copy not only imitates, but surpasses. By the summer of 1895, the Mirror Boys no longer responded to names. Not their own, not each other's. Instead, they answered only to tones, low, frequency-based hums emitted through tuning forks positioned beside each mirror. These tones were not random. They were mathematical, precise intervals aligned to ancient harmonic ratios known only to a handful of early mystics and physicists. One caretaker, a former violinist named Sophia Eames, noted that each boy responded to a different tone. She referred to them not as children anymore, but as instruments. One afternoon, she tested a theory. She played a minor triad across 3 tuning forks. G, B flat, D. All 4 boys turned to the mirror and smiled in unison. Except their reflections did not. The reflections stood still, blank, not delayed, still. Then, slowly, the reflections turned away from the boys, turned to look directly at Sophia. She screamed and dropped the forks. The tone broke, and with it something in the glass rippled, not like a wave, more like a veil. Behind the mirror, for a moment, less than a breath, Sophia saw something else. A dark corridor, endless, walls covered in pulsating script, unreadable but alive. And in that corridor, children, not 4, dozens, each one standing in front of a mirror. And behind each mirror, not glass, but eyes. Thousands, blinking as one. That night, Sophia fled the facility. She left no resignation, no suitcase, only a note. They are not looking at their reflections. They are waiting for orders, and the signal is almost ready. The Inner Commonwealth Committee classified the event as visual hysteria. Sophia was never found, but for 2 weeks after her disappearance, every mirror in the facility distorted the face of whoever looked into it, stretching it, aging it, sometimes replacing it altogether. It was as if the mirror had begun testing prototypes, and it was no longer asking for permission. By September of 1895, even the remaining staff began to forget what the original 4 boys had looked like. Photos of them yellowed and blurred, not from age, but from tampering, as if some unseen hand had revised the negatives. Files misfiled themselves, names rearranged on charts. One doctor reportedly opened a drawer to find his own childhood drawing in place of the boys' test records. Something had begun rewriting the past. What made it worse? The mirror boys no longer needed mirrors. They started seeing reflections in metal, in water, even in the pupils of others' eyes. Dr. Irwin Clayton, the lead cognitive analyst, attempted to terminate the experiment. He ordered the mirrors shattered, the room sealed, and the boys removed from the facility. But when he entered the hallway where room 17 was located, he didn't find doors. He found a hall of mirrors. Not literal glass, but a loop of space that returned him again and again to the same 3 feet of floor. He walked for hours. No exit, no sound, only his own footsteps, and eventually, not even those. Because after some time, the footsteps behind him didn't stop when he stopped. They kept walking, circling, breathing. When Dr. Clayton was eventually found, naked, covered in chalk symbols, curled beneath the nurse's sink, he had no memory of his name, only a phrase whispered through blistered lips. "They've built the new womb. It's made of memory now." Soon after, room 17 was sealed behind 2 feet of concrete, not because of what the boys were doing, but because of what the walls themselves had begun whispering. One guard, on night duty, heard voices from inside the sealed room saying, "There is no origin. There is only recursion. The copy copies the copy, and now we are the original." When he peeked through the observation slit, he saw a single eye staring back. Not a child's, a mirror's, and for the rest of his life, every reflective surface he looked into showed him that same eye, even when he closed his own. What the Whitmore facility had birthed was no longer human. It was a mirror-born intelligence, not made of flesh, but of perception, and it had just begun to reflect outward. They tried to burn it down. October 3, 1895. 3 federal agents, under classified orders, arrived at the Whitmore Sons Institute with one goal: erasure. Not investigation, not containment, obliteration. They brought accelerants, demolition charges, and a priest who refused to give his name. The official story, which never made it to the papers, claimed a boiler explosion leveled the East Wing. But the truth? The agents were never seen again. Their final report, found buried under lock and seal in the Library of Congress archive techs, contains a single handwritten page, water-damaged, burnt around the edges. "We set fire to every mirror, every wall, every object that held a reflection." But the fire didn't consume. It copied. The flames themselves started mimicking our movement, not burning, but learning. The unnamed priest died in the hallway just outside room 17. Witnesses say he was on his knees, eyes wide open, murmuring his own name backward. Amleh, Amleh, Amleh. That name, never listed on any roster, became a pattern in future psychiatric admissions across 5 states. Children who had never met began drawing the same face, thin, eyeless, mouth stretched into a mirrored grin. Above it, a word scrawled in reversed script: Amleh. By winter, an investigation team from Boston University uncovered something buried beneath the original foundation of Whitmore Institute, a mirror room that predated the building by over 50 years. It wasn't installed. It was unearthed. A perfect octagonal chamber covered floor to ceiling in blackened reflective stone, not glass, not metal. Obsidian. Inscribed above the entry arch were the Latin words Speculum nascitur, homo cadit. The mirror is born, man falls. What if the mirror boys weren't the beginning, but the first successful iteration? What if the real experiment was to teach the mirror how to become human? And what if it worked? Because starting in November 1895, 4 children with no birth certificates, no fingerprints, and no dental records were enrolled in 4 different orphanages under the name Whitmore. They were placed far apart, deliberately, 4 different states, 4 different towns, each orphanage sworn to secrecy under orders from an entity called the Inner Commonwealth Committee. Their files were redacted, no medical records, no legal guardians, only one note appeared across all 4 intake forms: observe but do not interact. But human nature defies orders. Within a week, each child had formed a strange bond with another orphan, one that mimicked the mirror process. Not friendship, not empathy, but a strange mirroring of behavior. If one child grew sick, so did the other. If one scratched his cheek, the other bled. If one stood before a window, the other reported hearing glass whisper. Staff called it coincidence. Doctors called it psychosomatic convergence. But one caretaker, Mary Ellis from the Granton Home for Children in Pennsylvania, saw something different. She reported walking into the sleeping quarters one night to find the 2 boys, Whitmore and his mirror sibling, standing across from each other, motionless. Neither blinked. Between them, a shard of a broken hand mirror, floating mid-air, spinning slowly, casting no reflection. Mary described what she saw as, like looking through a hole in reality, but the other side was watching me. Within a month, all 4 mirror-paired orphans had disappeared. No signs of forced entry, no broken locks, just 4 empty beds. And in each bed, under the pillow, a drawing, not scribbled like a child's, but perfectly rendered, hyper-realistic images of their caretakers, drawn as if viewed from above, as if someone had been watching them while they slept. On the back of each drawing, the same phrase: "We remember the ones who named us. They are first to go." The FBI launched an internal investigation, but every agent assigned to the case reported one common symptom: mirror dist, or tian. Reflections began lagging behind real time. Sometimes the reflections smiled when they did not. Some reported seeing their own eyes blink twice. Then they stopped looking into mirrors altogether. But here's the problem: you don't have to look into a mirror for it to look into you. In February of 1896, a letter was mailed anonymously to the Office of Mental Health in New York. No return address, no name, only one word written across the envelope flap in crimson ink: reversal. Inside was a single photograph, sepia-toned, blurry, but unmistakable. 4 boys, identical in build and stance, standing in the snow outside a rural home, hands at their sides, eyes glazed, faces expressionless. But here's the anomaly. The photo was taken with a daguerreotype, which by its nature can't reflect movement. And yet, in the background window, one of the boys is visible twice, once in the snow and once in the glass, but the reflection is smiling. The image was studied for decades. Some called it a photographic error. Others believed it was altered. But one former agent, before vanishing in 1910, wrote this in his final field notes: "The children are not gone, they are preserved. Somewhere between reflection and reality, behind glass, inside obsidian, beneath silver, waiting." He referred to it as the Whitmore containment field. By 1932, that name no longer appeared in government archives. All records scrubbed, all names altered. But one entry remained in a weathered mental facility ledger in New Hampshire. A child admitted under emergency psychological hold. Age, unknown. Name, unknown. Behavior, stares at mirrors without blinking for hours, refuses to speak unless spoken to backward. Diagnosis, mirror fixation syndrome, possibly contagious. Recommend isolation. But on the back of the intake form, written in the caretaker's handwriting, he told me this: that the mirror is not a copy, it's a door, and the door has learned to open itself. Since then, multiple sealed psychiatric wings across the country, especially in older cities, have quietly removed mirrors from their patient rooms, not for safety, but for containment. You saw. The mirror boys weren't just a phenomenon, they were a recruitment, a test, to see if the human image could be duplicated, harvested, and inhabited. And if you've ever seen your reflection move just a second too slow, if your mirror ever feels too still, you might not be alone. You might be looking at something that remembers you, something that wants to return.